So it's recording, and I'm going to walk you all through getting your project set up for Unreal. I'll be honest, I literally taught almost every minute of class. I just uploaded a 3-hour video, and we barely made it through it. So I don't think it's going to be an interesting one. I'm going to try to trim off some stuff to make this a little simpler. But we have that other video. See nothing. So I can help you with it a little bit. I think that there's some workarounds for it, but try exporting with some different settings too, to see if that works. Hey, try just changing in Maya Z to be up, because you can do that under your settings. You'd have to redo those animations, but it wouldn't be that big of a deal. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to export out our placeholder animations from Maya as an FBX file. We're going to bring those into Unreal, and we're going to wire those up so they're functional. The reason we're doing this now is because after we're done with that, we have a fully playable character, and then you can just revise those animations until you're done. I use a phrase a lot. You'll probably hear me refer to it. I think it was Mark Twain who had a phrase called "eat the frog," which basically he was saying, if you have to eat a frog every day, you should do that first thing in the morning, because then the rest of the day will be much easier to handle, right? Like, you're not going to dread eating the frog. So go ahead and eat it first, and that way the rest of your day is going to be fun, right? That's what we're doing here. If we eat that frog of Unreal right now, then the rest of this class or the rest of this project can just be making good animations, right? If you put it off till the end, it's always a disaster. So we're going to go ahead and use those placeholder animations and export those. So you need all 6 of those. If you don't have those, I would actually just say turn off your computer and watch, because there's a good chance that you'll get lost at some point in this anyway and have to kind of go back and watch. And so trying to frantically catch up in time, that just usually doesn't work so well. Okay, expires April, so I'm cool. So one last thing though, before we get into this, I made a mistake last class period when I animated these. I animated mine at 24 frames per second. What's it supposed to be at? 30. So 60 is what the game will refresh at, but Unreal actually recognizes animation at 30 frames a second. And so then it will just play 2 frames for every frame of animation in Unreal. I did all my animation in 24, so that gives me some issues. I'll be honest, where I kind of switch back and forth between doing stuff for fun and doing stuff for games. I do this all the time, and I'm like, crap. It doesn't really matter. It's not a huge complication. What it does mess up, though, is our keyframes that we put in on the game exporter. So, the way we're going to edit this, did it work? That's how this works sometimes. Sometimes you have to repeat the same process 7 times, and then on the 7th time it works. So the way we're going to change this is I'm actually going to change the frame rate in Maya. That way Maya lines up with what is in Unreal. And this is something I should have done before I started animating, but it's currently set at 24 frames per second. I'm just going to go to my settings and preferences, change my frame rate to 30, and I'm not going to check keep frame or keys at current frames. Okay, I'm going to leave that unchecked. And what will happen is it will keep the same timing. It will just shift all of those keyframes to be 30 frames a second instead of 24. So to be able to see that, if I select all my controls, you'll see that now instead of my idle being from frame 100 to was it 100 to 200, now it's from 125 to like 248 or 250, right? So it's still, it just messed up my keyframe numbers. There's kind of an easy way I can fix this, which is just to use my greater than, less than keys to jump to keys and make those changes. So I'll just go ahead and go 100, sorry, no, 1, 2, let's do like 700. I'm going to highlight all of those, make sure they're snapped, and then I can step back and forth with the greater than, less than keys. So see, 1 is my idle pose still yet, so that's fine. So I'll go File, my game exporter, my bind pose is still frame 1 to 2, so I'm cool there. I'll jump forward to my idle, which is now frames 125 to 250, so I can just change that in here. I'll jump forward to my, this is my punch, it's 275, my new punch is 275 to 413. My run animation is 500 to 525. My jump up is 625 to 633. My jump loop is 633 to 670. And then the jump down is 670 to 681. I'm actually going to go ahead and delete this jump all animation, or at least leave it unchecked, because I don't really going to use it. I'm actually not really going to use the bind pose one either. And yeah, I'll go ahead and keep jump all, I'll just leave it unchecked. So I'll do 625 to 681, and that's just if I want to look at the whole thing for animation purposes, right? So now that this is okay, I can resave this file if I wanted to, because all of this information will stay in the settings. So again, if you have all of these, we're going to export these out and get them working in Unreal. There's one more thing before we start doing that you should probably do, and I found out last class, this doesn't actually help nearly as much as I thought it does. It's a nice way of testing it quickly. But if we go up to ETSU, E3, DIGM classes, Greg, character animation, these resources, this is that FBX review. So did anybody get a chance to watch that video about how to test out some rigs? Okay. Turns out I was mildly wrong on that. Not exactly wrong, but mildly wrong. It actually works, but there are still some other errors that Unreal will sometimes throw that we have to go back and fix it. I think that it does catch most of the big things though, like if something's really going to explode or really not work, you'll learn that in the FBX review. We had a couple of people, the example that I gave you in class, there was the dragon versus that female character. They had some issues with the female character because there's apparently a joint that is misnamed, and so you have to go into the rig and rename that joint to get it to work right. So if anybody using that character? No, maybe. I can show you how to work with that. It's not a huge deal. It's actually, you'll probably even be able to figure it out based off of the error. It tells you this joint has a duplicate name, and so you just have to go back into to Maya, rename it, and re-export it, and it should work. So there are a couple of other little errors you may get, but it should still be a pretty stable way of testing this. And if it doesn't explode in that FBX review, that means you can probably proceed to the next step and try to get it into Unreal. But that's another reason we're kind of doing this quick test, because even if everything goes haywire and we have to start over from scratch, then we start over from scratch. It's not that big of a deal. So if you want to double click on this and install it, I've actually already done that. Because what we're going to be kicking out of Maya are FBX files. Has anybody used an FBX file for anything else in the past?
Experimented with it with Houdini.
So Houdini will probably recognize them. It's a transfer file. It allows you to send models to other programs. It allows you to send skeletal and animation information. Recognize I didn't use the word rig, because a rig is just a way of manipulating a skeleton. It doesn't always send the rigging information, but it will send the skeleton and keyframe animation on those joints. And so because of that, it's a pretty ubiquitous, maybe ubiquitous is too big of a word, pretty common export file. All of the game engines will accept it, or all the major ones will. And so that's how we're going to export this out as an FBX file into Unreal. And actually what we're going to export is a series of FBX files. So you'll notice in the game exporter, we have the model tab and the animations clips tab. Now under animation clips, I unchecked the bind pose, and that way I just have these 6 in the middle: my idle, my punch, my run, my jump up, my jump loop, and my jump down. I don't need jump all or the bind pose. Those are just there for me to manipulate in the scene so I can jump around to different parts of the timeline. So before we export this, we have to set up exactly what we need to export. We don't want to export like everything in this entire scene, because there's a whole bunch of things in here that are not necessary. So we're going to set up a selection set that allows us to select just the things we need to export. Now for my character, and actually all of the characters that I'm giving you up on the network, they're going to be pretty much the same. If I go to my outliner under this TSMG rig, open that up, you're going to start to see here's a bunch of the rigging elements. But what we're looking at next is this TSMG cruft. I honestly don't know what that means. Like, I don't know. I think it's probably just a custom naming convention. But if I open that up, you'll see this joint chain right there. If I hold Shift and click that little plus sign beside it, this is how we can kind of tell that this is going to work. We have a single joint with every other joint that controls this rig parented underneath it. I'm going to be a little sloppy. Ideally, what you would do is you would just go through and select just the joints you want to export. Instead, I'm going to just hold Shift and select all the way down to the last joint in the chain. These things here are just constraints. Those aren't really going to matter anymore after we export, because it's going to bake this information onto the joints. Okay? So again, the rig isn't even going to exist in Unreal. All we're going to have is the model and the joints and the skin data that allows the joints to drive the model. And what we're going to have on those joints is a keyframe on every joint for every frame of the animation. So that's what we're doing when we're exporting. It basically bakes out all of that rig into just keyframe data on the joints. So I have all my joints selected. Now I need to grab the mesh that is going to be selected by those joints. So for me, it's under this female mod. I have to hold Control and select them one at a time. And this can be very tedious. And it's also like problematic if you ever accidentally select the wrong thing, because you need to have the same thing selected every time. So what I'm going to do is, after I get them all selected, I'm going to create a new selection set that always selects those things. Now, if I did something wrong or I selected the wrong things this time, I'll have to make a new selection set later. But the easy way to do this with the game exporter is all the way out here on this export, where it says export all. If I follow that all the way out to the end, there's this little circle with the plus sign here. And if I click that, actually, I'm also broadcasting over WebEx if anybody needs to use it that way. This may be one of those things that's helpful. So if I click that, it's going to allow me to select a selection set. Okay, I'm going to call this export 1, just in case I have to make an export 2, right? And hit OK. So now I can actually minimize all of this stuff, because what it did was create a new selection set down here at the bottom called export 1, and that has everything I need to select in it. So now when I export, I can choose, instead of export all or export selection, I can say export object set, and I just choose my export 1 set. Okay? And that means I'm always exporting the same things every time I export it. Does that make sense? All right. So we're going to export out 7 different files. We export out 6 animations, these 6 animations here, and we need to export out a model file that has no animation on it. The reason for that is that's sort of like, that's what we're going to apply all of the animation to. So here's an interesting little way of thinking about this. Every character that I gave you, all 8 of those characters, if I animated a run cycle on them and exported out that run cycle into Unreal, and then I exported out a model file for each of those, since they all share the same skeleton structure, I could apply that animation to all 8 of those characters, right? And so that's why we have that as sort of a separate piece. It also means that, like, later on, if somebody makes a change to the mesh, you don't have to export everything associated with that character again. You just have to export out the model file, and the animation will drive that, ideally. Sometimes there's errors that happen. And so this sort of breaks that part, like how we've been like feeling like this all has to be one thing. What we're doing is we're splitting it up into these different things so we can work on them piecewise inside of Unreal. So I always like to set up a structure in here and then go ahead and save everything. That way I have it all saved. So I've set up my export layers. I'm going to go to the Model tab, which is right next to it. So the 2 we're going to be exporting is from this Model tab and this Animation Clips tab. So I'll go to Model first, and I'm just going to create an export folder somewhere. So if I click this little folder, you'll see I currently have one called Body Mechanics Rigs Export. I'm actually just going to make a second one. That was for my first class. And I'll call this one Exports 2. And hit choose. And so that means whenever I export, it'll put the file in there, right? That way I only have to click one button. The other thing is I'm going to enter a file name. Now this is one that I want to be consistent with, right? If I have 5 different characters, I don't want to just export like model, right? Like I want to know what this is, right? This character is I'm calling it the curvy female character. So I'll just say CF character, and that's fine, right? And so now when I click that, you'll see right below that I get this cfchar.fbx. Right? That shows me a preview of what my file is going to look like. The reason that's important is because we have all these same things over in the animation clip. So if I go over to animation clips, I'll choose that same folder. It usually defaults to it, and so I hit choose. Right? And then for the animation clips, I'll do cfchar. And then I want to make sure I put a space in there, something that lets me space to that next section. But I can't have an actual space. Just like anything in programming, a space has a meaning. It means you're on to that next word or that next line. So if the names of stuff have a space in it, it causes problems. So I'm going to do cfchar_. And then when I click out of that, you'll see that it gives me a preview underneath here, cfcharacter_idle.fbx. And so it's going to create each of my animations named like that. Right? So this should be easy to understand. At this point, I'm going to go ahead and save this again. Save scene as, I'll call this 002. So I'm doing this class twice. So, okay. So if I go look in that folder where I'm getting ready to export to, it is right here. Currently it's empty. And so if I go to my model tab and hit export, it's going to export out my character. Now, I want to show you that this was kind of unintentional, but I did this on something that was close to the bind pose. Let me do that again if I were on this like frame 640 and I exported it out. It's going to export out that FBX with her in this pose. And that's not necessarily what I want, right? If I go in here and open up this FBX file, it should open it up in the FBX review folder or program if you've installed that. And you'll see that she's just like permanently floating in the air. That's not her idle, or that's not her neutral pose, right? So I really want to export this on frame 1 when she's in her neutral pose. So I'll go back in here, and that's one of the reasons on animation clips I save my bind pose, because I can reset my frame to there, go back to model, export again, and say yes. Okay. And so now when I go look at this again, she should be standing in her bind pose. There we go. So this is what our character looks like now. Okay, so we don't have any animations yet. Let's go ahead and make one. If I go over here to my animation clips tab, if everything is set up, I'm still in the export 1 object set. I should just be able to make sure I have the ones I want checked and hit export, and it will export them all. It sometimes takes a little bit of time to export them all, so you may want to test it out with just one first, but I'm pretty confident this will work. So I'm just going to go ahead and hit export. Now, what it's doing is it's exporting a little bit less in this file. I actually still get the model file, or at least a reference to the model file. But what it's also doing is for each of those joints, you'll see my timeline, how it's kind of going across my timeline. It's sampling every frame and setting a keyframe on everything. So I'm exporting thousands of keyframes. That seems wasteful, but different programs sort of generate those curves differently. And so this is how Maya makes sure that, that it's going to be accurate. Also, like, it's not exporting out stuff like IK, right? So if I didn't have IK on my legs, they would just go through the floor. It's having to sample every frame to make sure the foot stays in the right place on every frame. Does that make sense? Okay. Export successful. So now I can go over here, grab something like my run animation, double click on it, and it should be opening up in my FBX review. I can pull back. If I right click, you'll see I have this play button that just lets me play the animation. Now, reminder, these animations are garbage, right? Intentionally, if you spent more than just a few minutes on each of them, then you're investing a little too much time for something that may explode, right? Like there were some people last period that were kind of like, did you spend a lot of time on it? Yeah, I saw them. You spent plenty. You spent the right amount. How much did you do?
Not long. I spent about an hour on the whole set.
That's cool. Now whatever. Right. So they may explode.
That's okay. It's still okay.
But they may not. More than likely, if it worked in the FBX review, we can make it work, right? But again, I just want to remind you of that, because what we do on Thursday, what we're going to do on Thursday is we're going to come in and start treating each of these animations as their own piece, right? And polishing them up as much as we can. And for a lot of these, it means deleting the keyframes that are in there and just start rekeying everything. Actually, probably for all of these. I'm probably not going to use much of any of this stuff. Or at least I'll start building here, but I'll really push all of it. So this is what we're getting. Again, you can kind of, that drop-down list doesn't work. You can keep opening these up to see more of them if you want to see how they work. But really, if one of your animations worked, then probably all of them did. Interesting. So this is one of the reasons to test them. So if you notice, the reason for that, my punch animation, I have from 275 to 413. Don't think that's right. I think it's supposed to be from 375 to 413. So that's one of the ways we can fix that. And that's nice to know. That's good information. Was that what you were going to tell me, or was it? Yeah. So so I can go ahead and re-export all of those now. Really, I only have to export that one, but I think that's right now. Actually, yeah, sure. Okay. How many of you have never opened Unreal before? Okay. So you're going to have to create an Unreal account. It's free. They'll probably start spamming you and trying to sell you Unreal. You can unsubscribe to that, but you need an account to be able to actually open up the viewer. To do that, we type in Epic Games Launcher. Now, it's going to prompt you and be like, you want to sign in? You're going to be like, I need to create an account. You're going to create an account. You're going to get to here, and you see up there where it says, over here on the side, we'll click on the Unreal Engine tab, right? And yours may still be grayed out here. If that's the case, just close Epic Games Launcher. Why can't I say that? Epic Game Launcher, and just reopen it again, and it usually finds it. What we're looking for is launch 4.19.1. If you're still not getting that, let me know. I can help you with that. I've mentioned this already, but if you're working on this at home and you want to work on it here, you need the same version in both places. There's two different ways you can do that. You can either download 4.19.1 at home, or whatever you download at home, you can install it on your portable hard drive and bring it in here and launch it from that. I've never done it that way, but I've heard that works okay, and it's a nice way of getting the newer version. I'm sure the newer version has a lot of bug fixes. I'm sure some of the things we're even going to talk about today will look different in there, because they update it pretty drastically when they do. The important thing, though, is that you have the same version and you're working on the same version in both places. Because whatever the newest version is that you open it in, that's the newest version you'll be able to open it in, right? You can't go back to 4.19 if you go up to 4.20. Okay. Before we jump into this too, I want to show you quickly that as part of this, under Unreal Engine, this is actually kind of interesting. They're trying to turn this into their own version of Steam. There's a store in here where you can buy games and stuff like that too. But under Unreal Engine, there's a marketplace. And the marketplace will allow you to buy some assets. So what we're going to create is just going to be in sort of this ugly gray level. But you can buy or get for free different environment elements. So we can go to here. Why am I not seeing this? On sale. All products. There it is, environments. And then under this filter here, I can set this to free or $10 or whatever, and hit confirm. And so you'll see that there's a whole bunch of free assets you can get. There's this Zen garden, there's all these backgrounds, advanced village pack, and some stuff from Infinity Blade as well. So there's a lot of stuff. You just download those for free. You can put all those assets into your level you're making, and that will just make what we're making a little prettier, right? That way you're not just running around on a gray level. That's like extra stuff if you're wanting to tinker with that. It's not necessarily a requirement. Well, it's definitely not a requirement. But if that's something you're wanting to make it a little bit nicer, there's a couple of good options in here. So back to Unreal Engine. Launch Unreal Engine 4.19.1. And we're going to get this. Actually, you're probably going to get this because you don't have a project yet. So that's what this is for, is to create a new project. Now, there's a lot of different ways of doing this, but what we're going to do is we're going to take one of these templates that already has a bunch of elements that are functional, and we're going to steal big chunks of it and use those on our character. I'm pretty sure the method I'm getting ready to show you will work on side scroller, third person, and probably top down with a couple of slight alterations. So anybody interested in side scroller or top down by any chance? Maybe. Actually, I'm going to do a test on it this year or this semester, and if it works, I'm probably going to start reteaching the class as one of those, just because I think it shows off a little bit better. But if you want to, that's fine. I can help you work through it. For this class, just because I've done it so many times, we're going to go ahead and do third person. Third person is the one that'll get you closest to your character, but you'll also be staring at the back of the character, right? And so there's some things we can do to change that, but that's one of the things we're going to notice here. So choose third person. Under this should be set to desktop console, maximum quality, and then I always use with starter content. And what that's going to do is give you a couple of extra elements you can sort of throw in there, some textures, some extra models you can throw into your scene. I would put this in a folder that doesn't have to, that will not have streaming issues, right? So like if you have a portable hard drive that's like USB 3.0, you're probably okay. If you have an old jump drive that you got at like Office Depot 5 years ago, maybe that wouldn't be where I would install it, because it'll make it slow trying to pull from that hard drive. But you could also probably put it in your documents folder, sort of temporarily, if you want to work from there. I'm putting mine on the D drive because I always set up this computer, so I'll know it'll be there. So I have it already set in the place in my D drive. I'll call this third person second class. One letter too long. Class. How about we just do class 2? And then I'm just going to hit create project. So what it's doing is it's copying all of these extra assets into a folder and creating this file for me. If at any point you need me to slow down, or if you have an issue, stop me. I can come help you with it. Okay. So the first thing we can do here, like this is just how I like to use it, is if we click on this button right under here, you see where it says Add New? It's directly below it beside Filters. It's a little bitty corner there. That'll expand that out so you can see all the folders. And personally, I like to work that way, just so I can kind of see everything in a more reasonable manner. So let's kind of explore what we have here. This is an actual folder in that project we just created. So I could literally throw other files in there and they would start showing up. Is there a question? Or? I don't think you need to download it. You can just close this and then reopen it. Okay, so this is an actual content folder. Like these are actual files that are on our desktop somewhere. And so when we're making changes to them, we got to remember we have to save them, or we'll lose all of that. So let's look at some of the things in here. We have some basic geometry. It's like a cube and stuff like that. We have this mannequin character. So the mannequin character is the character that we can play as right here. So we have animations for him, and then we have stuff about his character, his material, his mesh, his textures, right? Now if I hit play, you'll see how this character functions. Again, we kind of saw this the other day. WASD moves him around. Space makes him jump. And then the mouse kind of changes my camera orientation, right? And if I go in here and look, you'll see what I'm really doing in this case is on this mannequin, he's inside of this little pill shape, this little capsule. You see the capsule? He's inside of that, and wherever that capsule goes, he goes to. Whenever I tap the space bar, that capsule will pop up in the air. Right? That's how that's making him jump. He's staying inside of the capsule. The capsule is what is jumping. And when he's running, he's actually just running in place inside of that capsule. That capsule is just traveling around the scene. Does that make sense? All right, so how we're going to do this is we're going to bring our character in. We're going to steal elements from his character that makes him function. We're going to plug them into our character, and then we're going to replace him inside of that capsule with our character. Does that make sense? All right, so let's get started. First things first, like there's some other stuff in here. This starter content gives you some other like models and different things that you can put into the scene. Again, if you see something, you just drag it in there and drop it. You get an object in there now, right? And then there's another thing all the way down here at the bottom, which is a little confusing. There's this third person. Don't really worry about that too much. And then there's this third person BP. So BP stands for blueprint. Blueprint is a way of creating code or scripts without actually having to type anything, right? We're going to use it visually. How many of you used Construct in the Principles of Game Design class? Yeah. Kind of like that. Not exactly like that, but kind of. So that's what a blueprint is. And so if you see this third person character option there, that's what we're going to be altering to allow us to change some of that. So that's one of them. The other one is up under the mannequin character, under animation. You'll see that there's this third person anim BP. So those are the things that are making this character be functional, those two elements, right? So let's go ahead and start making our character. This is where things might start goofing up a little bit, but we'll see. I'm going to go under content here. I'll right click out here in the content area, say new folder, and I'll call this CF Care, right? Now in that folder, I'm going to go ahead and just import my mesh into the root of this folder. So I will right click here and go import to game CF character. And I'm going to go find that that mesh that I exported. So mine's under game rigs, body mechanics rigs, and then it was exports to. Right? So if I choose CF character and hit open, it's going to start importing this FBX into our scene. Now, there are two different types. You have an issue, or is that? Okay. if you have an issue, seriously, slow me down, because this one's going way faster than the previous class. It may be because I know which areas to avoid from the last class. So when you import something into Unreal, you're importing one of two types of mesh, right? There's a static mesh, which means it's never going to move, right? Or it's not going to deform or come to life, right? Like the rock is a static mesh. It means that you're not importing any animation with it. The other kind of mesh you would import in is a skeletal mesh. And so really anything that is going to move in your character or in your scene is a skeletal mesh, unless you're planning on animating it programmatically inside of Unreal. So for example, if my character is going to walk up to a door and when you click a button the door opens, like sometimes that's just something you can trigger inside of Unreal. If my character is going to try to, like even this, right, like this bottle, they're going to open this and take the lid off the bottle. How you would export that is this bottle with two joints on it, and that is an actual animation of those two joints driving those things. Right? It's a little bit more complicated. Something like a dresser might have a skeletal mesh. Anything that's going to look alive is going to have a skeletal mesh. And those are the only two types of models that Maya understands, or that Unreal understands. It's pretty much saying, is this an animated object or is this a static object? So this is an animated object we're bringing in. We're bringing in our character and we're wanting it to move later. So that's why we have skeletal mesh checked up at the top, right? We're also going to import the mesh itself. Actually, if we just hit reset defaults, usually this works for everything. The only thing we have to change on, actually no, we don't have to change that at all. So this should work, and then if I just hit import all, it's going to continue to bring in my character. Now I just imported that one FBX. I got a whole bunch of notifications, but none of it's really errors. Like all those are just like little notifications. A thing just happened, right, is all it's saying. But look what it created. It created my CF character node here, or model, right? It created a CF character physics asset because at any point I could make this character sort of turn into a dynamic simulation, right? I could have it turn into a ragdoll, or I could have other objects hit it, or I could have it hit other objects, right? So it has to be able to simulate physics on this object. The CF character skeleton is the thing that is going to drive the deformation of the mesh. So this is basically our skeleton from our rig with all of the rig stripped off of it. It's just the joints, right? And then the last thing is this skin material. Now if the character you're importing had textures, it may have brought those files in as well. One of the things you may recognize though is the materials probably aren't going to look exactly right. They're going to have some issues, right? We can always go into this material. It works very similarly to a material in Arnold where you can just start plugging stuff in. And so for me right now, mine has a solid color. My character has a solid color that's plugged into the base color. I could go in here and change this color and kind of make her whatever I want. Hit save. I just messed this up. And so now my character should be kind of pink, right? There we go. So we can also map in other textures in there. We can do a lot of little things on the material. So here's my character model. If I double click on the character model, it brings it up into this. If I click over here on skeleton, you'll see here's all of those skeletal joints we just exported. And that's her entire skeleton. And then there's the physics node over here, which doesn't necessarily, like, we don't really need to worry about this one too much just yet. Or maybe not at all for this project. So the other last little thing I'll point out is if you look down in the bottom, I guess the bottom left-hand corner of these nodes, you'll see there's a little star in the bottom corner of the icon. That means it hasn't been saved. So if Unreal crashed right now, I would lose all of that stuff I just imported in. So I occasionally will just go up here to File and Save All. And now it gets rid of that node. So if you made any changes to stuff, that's how you make sure you have those things saved. Okay, to make this easier to organize, I'm going to go ahead and create a new folder here. And I'm going to call it Anim. And this is where I'm going to import my animations. Yes. What's it doing? Yeah. I have lost it. This is all it does? Or does it ever pop up? Oh, yeah. Are you putting this on your chum drive?
Yeah.
The documents in there?
It might be why it's going so slow. Probably when you put it on a D drive, you have to make sure you're setting it here. I'm guessing that the reason it's going kind of slow is because it's going on here. Was this just a blank project, or was this also?
I just put in the settings and hit create and start creating.
So that's the thing, is it has to pull so much information across. Let's say maybe for right now, let's just try. Maybe new folder there. Try putting it in there. Let's see if that works. If you want to. That'd be alright, put it in there too. Try that. Yeah, I think it's just that drive. Okay. So, we have our character in here. Now we need to start importing animations onto that character. So we have all of our animations exported, but we need to import them in a specific way. So I'm just going to right click out here and go to import. I'm going to drag and select all of them except for CH or CF character and hit open. So this looks just like what we did a minute ago, right? The difference is we don't need that physics node or that skeleton node for each of them. What we really want is we want this character to import onto the character node we just made, or the character we just made. So I'm going to uncheck import mesh, and under skeleton, I'm going to choose this CF character skeleton right here. And under animation links, I think all of this is fine under the animation part here. And so if I just hit import all now, it should import all of that stuff in without those other unnecessary nodes. So there we go. Now we have all these animations. If I double click on CF character run, you'll be able to see her run. If I click to move around in here, it just kind of looks around, but if I hold down Alt, I can kind of tumble around her. So, if you're following along and this worked, congratulations, you can use that character. Did it work?
Her eyes and her ponytail are missing and her weapon, a little stick.
That's still really close. I don't know that I would call it fail just yet. What may be happening is the stick may not be constrained in there, so I think it's still useful.
Okay.
I think that there's a way we can do this. Like if you're this close, like it's small little things in the export. The eyes are the ones that are concerning.
Yeah. She doesn't have any joints in, I looked. She doesn't have joints in the eyes. There's not a joint for the ponytail, which is why they're missing.
So maybe what you just end up doing is reskinning the eyes to the head, or creating some extra, like you have to do some slight re-rigging on the eyes or something. But that would be cool. So we just need to have, we need to have those things driven by a bone, and so the reason the stick isn't working is it's probably just constrained in there. But yeah, I think we can make it work if you're still using it. So.
Yeah.
Yes. You just create a new folder and okay, just right click on it, import. And you're going to choose that first export file, the characters. I would consider killing those others. Oh, actually, that one's a tail. That one's the one that needs some NPS as well. So we'll just right click on the pass. For some reason, Edge is using a bunch of them too. Okay. Okay, so once we get to this point, this is good. If you're having a few small issues, like stuff like textures, that's fixable. If what it brought in was a bunch of spaghetti, I'd choose a different character. If it brought in your character at a weird angle, that's fixable, but a little bit frustrating. But there's things we can fix on it. This is really the test to see, does your character work? Does your character work? Does it get in, or is you testing them?
I use that one. I'm going to do that outside the class.
Okay, cool. Just really curious about how that one works. So yeah.
Yeah, after I remodeled it, I have fixed the skin place and everything. I just haven't got around to it yet.
That's cool. Yeah, I can help you work that out later on if you want to test it out. So, so we have this, and but really all this is an asset now, right? Just like I can go in here and look under this starter content and grab this rock or whatever, right? That's all it is. I haven't told it to do anything with it yet, right? It's just a thing that exists. So what we're going to do now is where it gets a little bit more complicated. So just since I got all this in here working, save all, and now we're going to go on to the next step, which is a little bit more complicated. So I showed you that blueprint and all those assets for the mannequin. Basically what I'm going to do is create those things for my character and then steal elements out of the mannequin's assets to make mine work. Okay? So the first things first, I'm going to go to my characters anim folder. And there's actually a couple of things I need in here first. So think of it this way. My character has a run, and if I double click over here, my character has an idle. But watch how ungraceful it is to go from one to the other. Right? She like kind of pops into it, and then she like stops, right? And that's not really how people run, right? They will accelerate into it, and they'll slow to a stop. And so rather than have to have two extra animations that start the run and end the run, because we would never be able to match that perfectly because you can stop running at any point, right? Unreal allows us to blend in between them. So what we're going to create is called a blend space. So if I close this down right here, I'm going to right click in my anim folder, go to animation, and I'm going to create a blend space 1D. It's going to ask which character I want this to apply to. You can probably guess that it's the character I imported in, my CF character. And I usually just rename this CF blend space. Just something so you know what it is, right? Now if I open this up and look at it, it kind of looks like my animation viewer, right? It actually is my animation viewer. We're just looking at this blend space. And so we can have this blend between multiple animations, right? And the one that I'm going to use is the idle and the run, right? I want it to blend from being completely still and idling to running. So I'll drag the idle animation first, and I drag that all the way to the beginning. So this little like graph thing we have here, you'll see it snaps to different points. I'll drag that to the very beginning of it at 0, 0, and then release it. Now you'll see that she just starts playing the idle animation. So on the other end of this, I'll drag the run. So I'll drag my run in, snap it to the end. And so then if I grab this preview value in the middle and start scrubbing, you'll see that if I put it at halfway, it's kind of like half idle, half run, right? That's not in and of itself a good animation, but it is a transition. So now you can see what this transition happens is if I drag from the idle up to the run, or the other way around, it's going to blend between those two. And so playing that trigger, or playing that that sequence, is what's going to drive our character transitioning in and out of the idle and the run. Does that make sense? Huh? Cool. I'm glad you're here. So just to make sure, I'm going to go ahead and hit save. Yes. So over there. Actually, good at playing those. Just like the first one, I'll shift this. Click. Import. So select all of them except for the check where it says import mesh, and under the drop down menu where it says skeleton, choose your and hit import all. And the last thing we did is right click. Animation, blend space 1D, double click on that. You're going to drag your MB idle all the way over to the image file. And then you're going to drag MB run to the other. Now we're going to grab that green thing in the middle and transition between. And see it kind of. And you can go and save that and close it out. Okay, here's the cool thing about this. There's more than one blend space, right? If we wanted to, we could make some really neat stuff where like maybe, let's say maybe our character gets more angry, and as they get closer to a different target or something like that, And so your character can go from like a normal run to like a more angry run as they're getting closer to it. We can do multiple blend spaces, and we can make these blend spaces a single pose. And so, for example, if I wanted my character to sort of look left, look right, look up, look down, right? I could just make 4 poses of my character doing that, and I could make that head turn happen on top of any other animation just by controlling a command, right? If I want my character to look around, that's how that works. It's actually how usually gun aims work inside of a game engine, or like head looks work if you want your character to look around. So those are blend spaces that would apply on top of stuff, and I can have it happening in multiple values, so we can sort of blend all over this different set of things. So this is actually kind of neat that this exists like this. We're going to go ahead and close this. And again, just because this seems to be going pretty good, go ahead and hit save all. Okay. So we're going to make one more thing in here. But before we do, I want to look at what we're going to make. So we're really bouncing back and forth between my CF character and this mannequin, right? And under mannequin, you'll see that it also has that blend space that we just made, right? But it also has this third-person animation blueprint. So I'm going to open that up and look at it really quick. So this first thing it shows is actually, this is actually deeper into the project than necessary. If I backspace into this anim graph, you'll see that this is the first thing we see, right? This anim graph is a way of guiding our character through different animations, right? It's called a state machine. So this default state machine is a series, if I double click on it, it's a series of different transitions from one animation to the other. And it's a way of defining how Unreal should know when to play which animation, right? Because you're going to give this to a player who's going to run around and do all sorts of different things to your character. When should it transition to the jump, right? And so this is what we have here. Right now, the idle run for him is playing that blend space that we just made, right? If I go back to the default, at some point, it should transition into the jump start animation. The way it can tell when to transition into that, if I double click on this, is when is the character in the air. Right? And so we have to create that variable. You'll see is in the air. Right? And when it's in the air, it should enter the transition to play jump start. And so then it will play the jump start animation. But at some point, it needs to transition from the jump start to the jump loop or the jump idle, right? When it would do that is as it gets close to the end of the jump start animation, right? We only want it to play that once, and as it gets close to the end of it, it'll start playing the jump loop. And then as our character gets closer to the ground, whenever it's not in the air, right, then it would transition to the jump end, which will play the landing animation. And then after the jump end, it would transition back to our idle and our run, right? So that's what we want to happen with our character too. So we're going to go ahead and steal all of this, okay? The other things that are in this is this event graph here. And this is actually pretty important as well. We're going to steal all of this as well. So I'm just going to go ahead and grab all of this, Control-C, and then go ahead and close this. Now what we're going to paste that into, we haven't made yet. So we need to make an animation blueprint for our character. So I'm going to right-click, Animation, and you'll see it's right here, Animation Blueprint. It's going to ask us which character we should apply this to, and it's our CF character skeleton right there. So if I hit OK, I'll call this CF Anim Blueprint. So if I double click on that, again, here's our state machine, but I'm going to go over to my event graph. And you'll see that the only thing I really have in my event graph are these two things here, right? I'm actually just going to kind of go down here and hit Control V and paste all of this stuff into here. And I can actually delete that old one, right? Now you'll see this is actually sort of like a little script that's happening, right? This is how we determine if our character is in the air or not, or like how we kind of establish is our character in the air or not. And this is also how we set our speed, okay? So our speed will drive our 2D blend space. And so this is some scripting I didn't really want to worry about. But if I hit compile, you'll see I get a couple of errors here. So compile is just sort of seeing if this works, right? And it doesn't. And the reason it doesn't is because that is in air variable doesn't exist in this blueprint we just made, right? It existed in that other one. So I have to make it here too. So I'll click add to a variable down here, and I'll just call this is in air. The way it's in here is capital I and capital A. We need the question mark as well. And I hit enter. And so now when I hit compile, it fixes that error, right? The other error is speed. And speed is a variable too. Now here's the difference. This isn't the air variable. If I go over here and look at my detail, it's a Boolean, which means it's either yes or no. It's on or off, right? Speed is not an on or off question. Speed? Yes. Well, yes, it depends on how you're interpreting that. Speed is a value. It's a float value, right? And so we need a different type of variable. Yes. Oh, so click on variable sources plus, and then is in air, spaces. And then when you hit compile, it should fix that. Is it helpful to have the LODX here? That might be easier so not to put my hands on the next one, but yeah, that's what we were doing, was just rectifying that error. Excuse me, let me get a sip of something. So we need this speed variable, and the speed is a float variable. So if I just click and add a new variable, you're going to see it adds another red variable here. And I can call it speed, but again, speed is not a yes or no question. It's a float. So with speed selected, if I go over here to my details, I can change that from Boolean to float. This could break connections. Do you want to search all variable speed instances? Change variable type. Just do it. That's fine. So once I've changed that, I'll hit compile again, and there it goes. It fixes my errors. So I'll go ahead and save that and close it for right now. Actually, before I close it, I'll show you. In my anim graph, I don't have anything, so that's the next thing I need to go steal. So I'm going to go back to my mannequin under animation, third person blueprint, pull this up, and it's in this. If I go to jump start, jump, whatever, go back to anim graph, I need to steal this default state right here. All right? So I'm just going to select it, Control C, or you could also right click and hit copy that way, and then close this down. I'll go back to my state machine into the blueprint. I'll paste that. Control V just works because right click doesn't. And so here's the cool thing. This is my entire state machine. I just drag from this little animation pose to result. And if I hit compile, I get a whole bunch of errors. Now the reason I'm getting all of these errors is because it's still referring back to that old mannequin skeleton, right? The other character. And so, although there's probably a couple of other ways of doing this, you understand it a little bit better if we actually just go through them one at a time and fix them, right? So let's do that. I'm going to double click on default, And pretty much each of these have something wrong with it. So let's kind of go through them one at a time, and this will also help us understand it. If I go to idle run and double click on that, we have an error here. And the reason is because it's referring to an animation that is not on my CF character. It's referring to an animation that's on a different character, which is it's actually the blend space from that mannequin character. So I can just drag my blend space in here and plug speed into none, and then animation pose into result, and then just delete that old one. And now when I hit compile, you may not be able to tell it, but I got rid of a few of those errors. Now you'll also see that I'm getting another error now. It's like speed, and it's looking for the speed variable from the other character, right? Well, I have my own, so I don't need it, so I'll just drag speed up here. And it's going to say, do I need to get the speed or set the speed? And I need to get the speed. Okay, so basically it's going to look at our event graph and say, what is our character's speed? And then it's going to plug that into this blend space to know where to trigger that. Okay. So when I hit delete, now that's set, compile, save, all is good with the world. Default. So after the idle run, the next error happens in this transition to it. So this is kind of the same as before. This is in the air variable is referring to the one from the mannequin. So I just need to replace it with ours. Right? Is in the air, get if it's in the air or not. So what that's doing is it's saying, constantly be asking, is our character in the air? When it is, it can enter this transition. So I'll drag from there into can enter transition. I'll delete that one. Whoa. Let's do that again. Get is in the air. Select this one, delete it. And so now again, when I hit compile, it gets rid of another error. If I start going too fast on these, slow me down. Okay, jump start. If I double click on this one's a pretty easy one. It's saying play that jump start animation, right? So all I really have to do is from my asset browser down here, I just need to drag my jump up animation to here. Now, there's one thing I don't want to happen though in this jump up animation. And if you look over here in my details, it says loop animation. That means if I hit the space bar, it will start playing that jump up animation over and over and over again. And that will look very twitchy. It's not going to look right. I only wanted to play it one time. So I'll uncheck that one, and then I'll plug this in to result, delete, and again, compile. We're just ticking these away. This is actually, like, to me, very satisfying. It's like, look, I'm fixing things. So go back to my default. From jump start, it's asking, when do I transition from jump start into jump loop? The answer is, when jump start is almost over, go ahead and blend into that, right? And so I can double click on this, and so this one gets a little more confusing. So what this is going to look for is the time remaining in that animation, right? Which is weird. It's like and it's a ratio of that time remaining. So let's say if your animation were 100 frames, right, and you said 0.1, then that means 10 frames before the end, it would start transitioning. Well, our jump up animation is like 5 frames long or something like that, right? So it's a really fast transition. So what I need is this time remaining ratio in our animation. To find that, I just right click and I start typing time remaining, and it's this one right here, time remaining ratio of the CF character jump up. So that's what I want. Get that. I will plug that into this top value, and I can delete this other one. Now this is cool because this value I'm plugging it into here allows me to adjust it, right? If it's transitioning too long or too short, I can change that 0.1 to a different number later and make it transition a little differently. But that's fixing some of that. So if I just hit compile now, wipes away some more errors. I'll go ahead and save this. And I'll go back to my default one more time. Okay, our jump loop animation. Again, this one's an easy one. This is just play the jump loop animation, right? So I can delete that one, drag jump loop into here, plug it in. And that one's actually fixed. The only other thing you need to notice is I do want this one to loop, right? I want this one to continue cycling. That way if my character is falling forever, they will continue to play that animation until they hit the ground. So I'll hit compile, save. So we only have a few more errors left to go. So the next transition is from jump loop to jump end. And this one is interesting. If I open this up, you'll see that what it says is the character in the air? And if the character is not in the air, then it will transition to that animation. So what it's looking for is the instant our character touches the ground, right? And so we really just need to replace this is in the air with our is in the air. Is in the air, drag it, drop it, get if it's in the air or not, and plug that into not. And then I can delete this node. If I hit compile, gets rid of some more errors. Okay, default. So once it's not in the air, it's going to start playing the landing animation, right? And so if I go to jump end, again, I just need to play this third person jump. So that's the jump down animation for us. Again, I don't want this one to loop, just want it to play one time. And I can drag from there into my result and delete the old one. Compile. Only 3 more errors to go. And that's kind of crazy because we only have one more thing to edit. So if I go in here, this one actually is going to fix most of it. Actually, I think all of it. It's again that time remaining ratio. So what this is going to do is say, as we're getting close to the end of the jump end animation, as our character is like recovering from that jump, we should transition to wherever our character is in terms of running or idling, right? So I'm going to go ahead and just do this third person. Oh, this is time remaining. Time remaining ratio for a jump down. And then I'll just plug that into the top number and delete that. And so here's the cool thing, when I hit compile, it fixes all of the rest of my errors because now my entire state machine is fixed. So save that. Yay, now I have a state machine. So with all of that, you would think that if I hit play in this game, we would be able to play our character by now, right? But we can't. The reason we can't is because this pill shape here is still referring back to that character, the mannequin character, right? And I need it to be referring to our character. So that lives in a slightly different place, okay? That's going to be under third person BP. And if I expand that out under this blueprints node, there's this third person character. I double click on that. And so this is where the controls for that little pill come from, or that capsule come from. So some of this is like a gamepad, like if I'm using a joystick to play this. Mouse input, so when I move my mouse around, this is why the camera moves around with it, right? Movement input, so like my character running. So a lot of this stuff is in here. We're actually going to come back to this in just a second to add in our punch. But right now we need to get our character functioning in the viewport. And so if we go over to this viewport node right here, you'll see that we have this capsule, we have this camera. I can actually change where this camera is located and how this camera is looking if I wanted to for this. So I could make this a little bit more of a top-down camera if I wanted to, make it a lower camera. But this is where it's going to start. And you'll notice that we have a bunch of different things in here. We have this third-person character, right? This is like the node itself. There's this capsule component, which is this thing here, right? And that's the thing that's kind of sliding around our scene. This arrow component is just sort of the direction it's headed. And then this mesh inherited is the thing we're wanting to look at. So mesh inherited is the mesh that is being shown inside of that capsule as it's running around. And currently over here, it's the SK mannequin, right? So if I choose this drop-down list and choose our CF character, it will bring her in. I have no idea why she's so much smaller, because I swear she usually isn't. I don't know what's happening there. I'm not going to worry about it too much. You can actually scale her up if you wanted to, sure, we can do that. The other thing is, like, this will work now. If I hit compile and save, I can make my character run around. If I hit the play button, like, now she slides around everywhere, but it's not knowing which animations to play. To do that, I have to point it at the animation blueprint for this, right? So if I go back to this third-person character, back to our viewport, again, under Mesh Inherited, I pointed to the right character, but right above that, it says Use Animation Blueprint, but there's nothing in there. So if I click on that, I can find my CF Anim Blueprint right there. And so if I do that, hit compile and save, and say a little prayer, then usually she will run around my scene. If I hit the space bar, she'll jump. And so this is really what we want it to look like, right? I can see now, just from clicking all of these buttons, all of my animations are triggering everything except the punch, right? So I need to now set up that punch animation. Just so I have this, I'm going to hit escape, file, save all. Just out of curiosity, I know not everybody's following along. How many of you are getting this to work? Anybody? All right, cool. If you're at that point, that just means you have to re-export now, right? If you re-export your animations, this just gets better and better and better, and you never have to render. You just have this animation, right? So I'm going to go ahead and add in my punch. So back in this third-person character, I'm just going to go down here and right-click and type in left mouse. And so now whenever I click my left mouse button, this thing will fire off, right? So if I click my left mouse button right now, like, in theory, it's sensing that, right? Or at least when I'm playing it. So if I hit compile, like, all these other things are connected. You don't really see anything here. What do we want to happen when I click the left mouse button? Yeah, play the punch animation, right? That's all we want to do, is play the punch animation one time whenever I click the mouse. So I can right click and type in play animation, and there's a couple of different ones here. There's play animation mesh. There's also an option for, like, play animation montage. There's a lot of different things that we could make happen here. I could make it like play a whole cinematic, or I could make it, you know, some effect fire off or something. But I'm going to do play animation mesh, and then I just have to go from pressed into that. So pretty much anytime I press the left mouse button, it will play an animation. I need to tell it which animation. Right now, the new animation to play says select asset. If I drop that down and choose punch, and I'm going to leave looping unchecked. Now if I hit compile and save, it all should be working. And so if I hit play, if I click my mouse now, look at that. She's a punching. Oh yeah, I forgot about that. Oh, I remember why it's messing up now. Oh, I remember. Okay. Oh, let me pull this back up. I just remembered how to fix this. Because I was having the same issue in my previous class. So the reason this is messing up is because I have, I'm setting it to play that animation, but at the end of that, I'm not telling it to set it back to the correct thing, right? And so, yeah, here we go. That's what I thought. So what I have to do is at the end of that punch animation, I have to set it back to the default idle state, right? And so what I need to do is go back in here, and at the end of this, at the end of it playing this animation, I want it to delay just enough time after, let's see, is it after pressed? Yeah. Delay just enough time and then set it back to my animation blueprint. Because basically what happened is whenever I hit the mouse button to punch, I disabled my blueprint, right? And so what I need is set animation mode mesh. And I need this to be set to use an animation blueprint. I'll probably have to bring in the specific blueprint I need. So let me move these down just a little bit here so we can see it. Move this back over to here. There we go. And I need to do a delay. So the amount of time to delay at the end of this before setting this back to the animation blueprint is the length of my animation for my punch. So I'll go ahead and hit compile and save, and that should keep that in there. But I can go in here and look at my animation now for my punch. And if you look at that, if I just mouse over, do you see that number it shows in sequence length? 1.26667, right? That's the number I need to put into that delay. So, let me go back to my blueprint. Here we go. It was 1.26667, right? So it should delay that long and then set it back. So the way I do that is plug this in from the ending of this to there, and then after that, plug it back into here. So let me just kind of scoot over here and spread this out so you can see it a little more clearly. There we go. Compile, save. Yes, did you have a question, Ethan? Is there another 6 in there? That'll probably still be close enough. Well, maybe I will go ahead and put one more in there. Let's see. You are right. So there was another 6 in there. That's awfully accurate, though. I think it'll be fine. Compile, save, and what should happen now is if I hit play and I'm moving my character around, notice what happens here. If I hit the punch button, it disables her run, right? But as soon as that animation is over, she can run again, right? So that's not necessarily pretty, right? Like if you're showing this animation off, you just want to be careful when you show the punch. There's ways of making that work functionality-wise. That's way more scripting than you probably even want to get invested in for this. So what I would say is how you show this off is you make your character run, and then you stop and punch, and then you make your character run again, right? And those should all show off pretty well. Okay, that's cool, because that was the issue I was having in my previous class. I couldn't remember why it does that, and I just remembered. So there's one last thing I want to do, and that's I want to make my character actually be able to punch things, right? When they punch, I want that to actually affect physics objects. to get a physics object in the environment, I have to, oh, my screen just went dead. There we go. I have to drag one in here. So I have this object here, it would work, but I'll go ahead and create a new one. Under geometry, these meshes here, I'll just drag a 1 meter cube in here, raise it up, hit F to kind of focus in on this, scale it. Now this is actually something that I'm kind of fighting with. I can't remember exactly how to do this. So this is a good place to just save everything because from here on out it's a little bit experimental. This object, if I just hit play right now, if I bump into it, nothing happens, right? But if I select it and go over here and say simulate physics, then file, save all. When I hit play, if I run into that, it'll knock it over. The problem with that is my whole character is what's knocking it over. And so if I go to here and have him punch or have her punch, her fist goes through it, right? And so this is actually the element that I need to figure out how to make that simulate. So there's a couple of things I can do. I think I can select her mesh, but this is the part again, I'm still kind of fighting with this, so bear with me as I try some stuff. I can go to this blueprint in here. I can select her mesh inherited, and I believe I can just make this collide with stuff. So I have to play around with this here. Collision preset. So I thought I could do simulate physics and then hit compile, save, and let's see if this works now. I don't think this actually works. It should, but it doesn't. So it goes through it. And that may be because the collision preset is the character's mesh. Always create. Always create physics state. See, I really thought that this worked. Maybe enable poly collision. Let's try those things and see if either of those work. Play. No. So there's a trick way of doing it, but it's not really the way I want to do it, which is I can go into this node and I can add an invisible ball at the end of her fist that when she punches collides with the object. But that's not necessarily what I want. I want the mesh to collide with the environment.
Clothing.
Wait, what? Oh, that is clothing, you're right. Physics, simulates physics. Yeah. What happened is the last time I made this tutorial, it worked differently, and so now I'm trying to figure out how to make it work better now, and I need to do a little bit more research on it. So I'm going to go ahead and stop there, and I'll probably tinker around with it again for the rest of the class here, but I'll have you all some answers on how to make that actually react to physics in a more efficient way than that invisible ball at the end of the hand thing. The cool thing about this is once you get these physics objects reacting, you can do whatever you want to it. So if I hold down, I think it's Control, or maybe Alt. Yeah, Alt, I can start doing duplicates of these things. And this is kind of how I made my little domino thing that we can just make our character knock stuff over, right? And I think that this is going to be able to, you're going to be able to show the actions a little bit more clearly on this. So again, I'll keep researching on this, and get you some answers on that physics punch by the end, or by the beginning of next class. So what I want to show you is one kind of last element, or not element, but if I go to the Greg Merlo Learning YouTube page, I have a whole playlist that walks you through this. I go through it much more efficiently, but I would say that the custom, which one is it here? Adding physics. This is the one that I think kind of changed a little bit. Also, the other one that changed a little bit is this export process. At that point, the game exporter didn't exist. So if you needed to export multiple animations, you had to do them one at a time, right? I think that that's the part that probably clicked for everybody. Everybody probably got most of that. So I think that you're probably okay there. Next class period, I'm going to kind of try to start moving forward toward just the animation parts, because we have 4 different animations to focus on. 2 of them I'm going to start working on next class period. I may not get through both of them, but I want to show you the idle, the run, and the punch for sure. And I'd like to show you a little bit about the jump animation, just to make sure you have all of those frames correct. But really there'll be like some short tutorials or short lectures for each of those different animations, right? And really your entire project from here on out is just making those short animations. If you look at the number of frames you actually have to make for this thing, it's actually not that many. That's kind of the cool thing about it, is you can focus in on each of those and make each of them really strong, right? But now that you have this functioning, let's say I made some changes to my run, right, in here. If I was like, oh, you know what, I want her hips to really dip more than this, and so I go in here to my animation editor, graph editor, and frame in on that, and I really pull down how far her hips dip and push up how high up her hips go, right? To where this animation now looks like this, right? Which is much more exaggerated, but let's say that's better. The cool thing about this is I am ready to test that out in the animation, or in the game, in like 15 seconds. Like really all I have to do, open up the game exporter, uncheck all of these, recheck run, hit export. It's going to export out over top of my run animation. I'll hit OK, and I go back into my game engine. I find my run animation. I right-click on it and say re-import. And if I say re-import, it's going to pull it from that same location. If I exported it to a different location, I would say re-import with new source. But if I say re-import, it's going to pull that in. I'll say File, Save All, and when I hit play, now when she runs, I get that much bigger run, right? And I can test that out. Now that seems way too big, right? One of the things to notice is when I said that little pill is that thing, and that little capsule is what's moving her around the scene, I can change attributes about that as well. Like I can hit the space bar, she jumps that high, right? If I go in here to that blueprint node, third person blueprint character, I'm going to choose, I think it's this character movement inherited. This is where all of that information is. So right now her jump velocity is 600. I'm going to change that to something crazy, like 3,000. Right? Her walk velocity, or her walk speed, is 600. Right? That's how fast she's walking. And what that means is 600 units per second. Right? I could change that to like 1,500. Right? Hit compile, save. And now when she runs way faster, right? Which isn't accurate. And when she jumps, she goes way up here, right? So I guess what I'm trying to show you is that you can customize this, right? If you want your character to walk around the scene instead of run, that's just fine. If you want your character to jump a little higher, that's fine. In fact, when we start working on the run animation, I can show you how to line up the foot placement so it feels like your character is running at exactly the right speed. Because when it says 600 units per second, that's what it means in Unreal too, or that's what it means in Maya too. So we can move our character 600 units per second in Maya and get a good foot placement to where it doesn't feel like our feet are sliding. In all honesty, mine would probably mess up a little bit because I scaled my character up, so I'll probably scale her back down just to make that work. But is this making sense on how this works? All right, so I've recorded this whole video. I'm going to, I'll go ahead and upload it. I would strongly, strongly, strongly encourage you to, when you come back to class next time, to try to have yours at this point, right? It's fighting with getting all this stuff into Unreal is the stuff that kind of makes people fall behind on this project. Back me up, class 2, right? Okay. So it's very easy to get into this like, I'll do the Unreal stuff later. Right now I want to animate. And what will end up happening is you'll animate something that's really pretty in Maya and will look terrible in Unreal. And you'll just realize you wasted like 14 hours. Right? So get it in there now, that way we can just do these quick tests like this. This is how it works in functionality in Studios. I told this to the last class. I interviewed for ZeniMax Online. I interviewed at their studio. And they had this really interesting way of testing their characters. Is at the beginning of the morning, you came in, you exported out your characters, and then everybody went into a conference room and started playing the game. And they had a level that only the animators ever played. Well, only the people in the development team played. Which was a giant grid with every character in the game on this infinite plane, right? And so you're like, okay, I animated character B15 or whatever, and they would run over to B15 and they would start interacting with it to see how that character reacted to it. So you'd start fighting it, or you'd start shooting spells at it, or whatever. And so that's how you would test it. It's sort of like a little sandbox to allow you to test your animations. Super cool level that just was giving you immediate feedback. That's where they gave each other critique. They didn't play blast anything out. They didn't render anything to show it to each other. That's where all the animators sat in a room and told each other how to make the animations better. And they did this every day. So this is the pipeline that it works in. And again, I have a feeling that this is going to start crossing over in some very interesting ways in the near future. So get this in, and once you get this in, you can keep polishing this up to the very last second and just capture whenever you're ready. Right? Any questions on this? I know a lot of you may have individual questions, so the rest of the class I'll just kind of bounce. So the rest of the class I'll just kind of bounce around and help people out and eat my grapes and Cheez-Its. That's the plan, right? All right, cool. The rest of the class is yours. Sure, Heather. You nodded at her, so she had her hand up. Okay.
So I already restarted launch. This pops up, so I was like, okay, I restarted, opened it back up, and said this is not
This is 4.22. Did you do it now?
yeah, I downloaded it, and then because when you restart your computer, it says it is installed.
Yeah, if you restart the computer, why? So hit this one. Why don't we just try restarting at this game? Yeah. See if that works.
Also, another question it looks fine.
So are you just needing to use 422 at home because we started later? I think basically all of them need one more pass before you put it into the thing. If it says pass, then it's so you're,
The common, the title.
yeah, well, I tried to, I don't know, I have this set up in D2L. I tried to let them know that it's a pass, but that doesn't mean, okay, everything's good, put that one in the end. Like it was more like, that's a pass, and then we still want to make it better work. So that was the big thing. And there were a couple that were like, it's a pass. If and I thought, I think this is pass. It's a pass, but still, if it goes in your door, I want to still put it. Oh, really good. Those are good. What do you think about the difference between the two art tests? Like, is it good? Like, is this fitting all of the potential? Yeah, I like that much better now. You can thank Catherine Ross for it, but she's sending this email. She's like, oh, and I was like, all right.
I think it does work. I mean, I like doing the cycles better than I would like doing the lip sync. That that'll make my dance song in there. I didn't want to, I wanted to do the spots. I wouldn't have a fun class. We'll see.
Yeah.
I know I would.
Oh, that's good. A lot of short animations. Yeah, but I don't know what about that. I know there's a way you can install it onto a portable hard drive and launch it from that, but I honestly don't know how to do that. Like, try to Google it. I'm sure somebody on Reddit has a really awesome tutorial. University of Reddit. Doesn't work. Does it explode? Are you implying that's not what you wanted?
Slightly different, like slightly.
Well, there's two problems. One is the scale. One is that rotation issue. I think they're both a conversion from Maya to Unbridge. So what I would try. Can I switch over and start throwing out ideas? So my first idea would be in Maya, look and see the play. And I don't like that you're just scaling up the grid, because really that means you're still one of the things you might try is, can you say about this? So you can go in here. So a few things I would try. Very important. Zero. Not necessarily. But that means that what you would do is you're probably setting the zero and bring it rotate. So you can try that, or you leave it while when you export under settings here, you can change that to zero. Try those two things. That was actually an issue that I was having before we did that. Because he was going to get there and do the same thing. It was the advanced character thing. What are short standards? So is this guy true? So I think that was part of what he was having to, so my art chat with him to figure out how it started working for him. But that would be the first thing to fix that. Other thing is, if it's a multiple 10, then it may be fixable. So you scale them up like 20, you said, and you got it about the right size, or is it still too small? I'm afraid we kind of this. It's kind of neat. I think if we get them in there in the right location, we can also scale them to here. Makes sense. And you make a castle bigger. So you can do that. Technically, I think you can also do this. But probably don't want to have to do it that way. That's a little bit messy to do it that way. We can't. But one of the other things we can do is we're at centimeters. So that means each unit is a centimeter. And so he is, yeah, so he is like 10 centimeters long. Doesn't very good. It's a little bit longer than if each unit is a millimeter, bigger. Because what this does is it exports one unit to one unit. So now try exporting it like that. Change these settings to this. And then export it again and see if it's going to be bigger. Yeah, it's just Windows, same Windows settings, preferences, settings. And then it's under your size. So degrees times it's going to be one of the combinations of those things. And really, I think the way I do it is yeah, try exporting that out. It's going to be a combination. I think probably what I would try first is try exporting out the millimeters, get them in there kind of the right size, you know, and then try to, if that works, then try to figure out the Z. It could be export out with Z, or it could be change the world axis to Z here. I'll be honest, that's a little annoying because all of the characters are probably modeled and rigged model Y up, so we just already did that. Do something like that. Just rotates so you get this. It's not that big of a deal to do something. Yeah, I think the first thing I'll try. So try that and see if it. Try that and see if it imports in correctly. And then still gives you. I have a feeling it'll fix some things and work some things. But you. So are you doing the basic? Are you doing like a complicated stuff? I think either one's fine. I just trying to figure out. If we're doing the basic, probably targeting big one project. Yeah.
I emailed him, but when they took a look at it, they only reviewed so that's honestly what they
Should maybe we
That's
just
what
talk about it.
that's a good one. That was a good one.
Tweak her red animation a little bit, but her eyes, they're still
Oh,
voids.
wait, are they voids or are they cross?
They're voids. They're just not there.
So the mesh isn't coming.
Yeah.
That's just because they're not skinned.
Yeah, because
So,
they're
yeah,
void,
you can-
and the thing is that she has two types of groups. She has an unbound group, and she has an unbound group and a bound group.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think what I would do, I mean, like, unless you wanted to blink and look around a lot, I would just take those eyes and skin them to her head. Go back to the bind pose, skin them to her head, and then keep re-export it.
To her head, just
To the head joint.
got
And
it.
then, like, I mean, unless there are some eye joints in there.
I don't think so. I mean, it's unbound. They're unbound.
I mean, you can always add one to the hierarchy at the end of the head,
Yeah.
put them in the center of the eyes, and then leave her to look around, kind of worries.
I'll re-rig her ponytail. That shouldn't be too bad.
Yeah.
So,
And then that stick is probably not driven by a joint.
nope.
And so what you would do is get her back to bind pose again, put a joint inside it, spin that joint.
With a stick.
Yeah, and then go ahead and let that control that joint too, but then that has to be parented back to her root. So the joint has to be parented back to her root, so it's still all one skeleton.
Got it.
So it makes sense, so really that stick is just an extension of her body, but this control is what's driving. And I think, yeah, I think it's doable. I think it's actually, there's a cheap way of doing it too, which is, probably not going to be the best control, which would be to just skin that entire stick to her hand joint, and then you can't twirl it. So I think that I would.
I would rather do it a slightly harder way, the better results.
Well, the eyes are easier to me, so you can just skin that to the head. But I mean, if they're movable, you may as well, you can put a couple joints in there, just a little rotation. And you kind of have to. So right now, that eye control drives the mesh itself.
I have no idea.
It looks like it. Depends. Like, you don't want to have to load a whole new character in, so it really depends on how quick you're moving this.
There it is. So, constraint video.
Oh, yeah. Nah, you can still do that. Like, I mean, there's some. The interesting thing, every Gears of War human character is the same mesh. They just have a blue shade. So I think what I would do, you already have that eye control driving. Kind of cheating over here.
I mean,
Have you saved it?
she's ready.
Okay. Let me break.
Okay.
Thank you for all this bag. I didn't want to throw it on the class.
Probably you were just saving the crumbs.
What?
Probably you were just saving the crumbs. The crunchies.
The crunchy stuff. Thank you so much for when you run out of the other.
Oh, no, you're fine. Yes. The D doesn't. The D is like a hard drive that's on that computer, but if you go to a different computer, it's local to that machine. That's the only issue. But now that you've saved it on there, you can actually just pull all that project data over to your jump drive, and then whenever you set down the next one, just put it back in the D to run faster.
For right now, I've copied every game set over the folder. He actually does, but I want to make sure.
Yeah, that should work. So, this, do you have the bind code saved to
It's at 140 something.
40 something around?
Okay. It's right after her attack. I didn't. That is one.
Okay. So, what I would do is like from this pose, we go in here. So you have this unbound skin here. Unbound group. So that means the power is coming in. Again, I would just make sure the power skin that to.
The same way I do the stick.
Yeah. With her eyes, I think one of the things you can do is. So are those imported here?
Nope.
All right. So all those things that are like the eyelids, I would probably just scan that to the head. So we can go in here, just that, grab the, is this the controls?
Not beneath it, is all the.
Okay, this is all the export joints though?
Yes.
Okay, cool.
This is everything I exported. I exported everything in that group.
So you can just select the head control and then these eyelids. And I scared the animators are gonna blast. So grab all those and just go to scan, on scan, and just select to show the hierarchy. And just have to select it, combine that, and now I think when you export that should come in with the rest of the so now you're getting double transformations.
You don't have to have like a prominent. Well, it's good actually how many views.
So you get that. Now the eyes are a little bit more difficult though, like, but I think I was trying to think of the best way of doing this, right? Because she already has this mesh that's being driven by this issue, right?
The bosses.
I don't know what's the shrink.
Cherish it.
Shrink to speed. So yeah, so you get this, right? But you have this eye. Oh, there's another aim constraint.
Wow.
So really what you could do though is you could have this eye mesh. But you can hide it. And then duplicate it. Move that outside of all of this. H. And then you could create a joint that is at the center of the original eye. Create skeleton, create joints. Put that out there and then select.
I have joints here.
So it's right there in the center of the eye. And then what you would do is parent that underneath the head jaw, something like that. So, and then the thing that would control the rotation of that would be that hidden eye. Does this make sense? Like grab that, grab this.
Actually, I think.
Did I do that backwards?
I think you did. Repeat. There we go.
There we go. And so that head joint point right there will be driven by this eye, which constraints that, right? Constraint. Oh,
Yes.
thank you. Yeah, does
Can
it
you
else?
give it to me? I need to understand.
So then I'm just going to do a parent constraint for that.
To the eyeball?
And so what's happening now is that the visible version of the eyeball is already rigged up to this. So whenever I move it,
Why did you make an invisible version of it?
because that's the one that's not going to export. This one right here is going to follow along with this aim, right?
Yeah.
But the other one, but it's not skinned. Right? So since it's moving and getting all these translates on it, it's invisible, and it's driving that joint, now I can just have this joint skinned to my duplicate version Does that make sense?
Say that again.
So, it's actually,
Trying very hard.
no, you're good. Let's actually see if I can. That, right, so I'm just going to isolate these so you can see.
Okay.
So, we have two eyes here, right? We have the one that is like the mesh itself is being driven by this, right? And so that mesh of the eyeball is also driving the rotation of that new joint we created that is at the center of the head.
Did you parent the joint to the moving eyeball?
You know, I think I constrained it. So now when I move this, in theory, we should get some rotation on this joint. Right? And so now that joint is rotating because this eye is driving. So I basically just kind of made this right eye a drive or control. So control H, what I can do then, just to hide that, and what I can do then is that we call this R so now since that joint is rotating, you can just skin the duplicate eye too. So I can just grab that one, right, scan, line scan, and then I have this set to select the joints. And so now, even though that other one is hidden, it's driving the rotation this one in a scanned way. So that means that the animation on this one's working too. Does that make sense? So basically, like, since he rigged it up to where it was driving a piece of mesh, I just had that piece of mesh drive the bone.
How did you make the mesh drive the bone? What did you use? Is it rotate?
I took the parent constraint.
Oh, okay.
So like because as this moves, we're getting rotation on this eye, and so I parented it into the hierarchy of the head, and then I parent constrained the rotation of it.
So the hidden eye.
Yeah, to the hidden eye.
Okay.
I think it would have worked better to orient constrain it. It's all right.
It's fine.
If it gives you any issues, what you would do is just go in here to this this constraint there, or here. Just translates.
Yeah.
But I don't think it causes any issues.
Let's try importing that in.
So
She's just gonna have one eye.
So we need to get a slightly, so it's all of this, right? Down the,
Actually, what I have is, if you scroll down, I have a select set.
oh, yeah, let's just do that.
GeoGems.
So let's do that. And then I am going to take out that one eye. So take out
Did I write right?
that one. Don't. And then we'll just create a new one. So options, name explorer. We have that one. I'll just create a new one. And you can always add new stuff to it.
Yeah, let's do it. It's Lily. Let's do Lily too.
Problem is, I just don't even know what to really look for.
It's fine. It's fine.
And so,
Oh, and the animations don't have to be changed because you just need the new model.
we had another joint in there, so maybe it wouldn't hurt. So let's
Yeah.
go ahead and just re-export the body as well. But that's
Lily too.
I'm just testing it here. We'll do this with a scratch. I have so many folders and stuff like that. Import this, so we have Lily 2. So the cool thing about that is now you can still animate her eyes looking around if you wanted to. I don't know what's driving her blinks. You'll probably have to do some extra rigging if you ever change her blink. The same thing with the ponytail, or just like I will control with that.
And the ponytail's very important.
Yeah, it makes it too. I mean, it's very cute. What's it good? Hey, like, I think once you get it in there, like, get it in there and test it. Because when you're watching her run like this,
Yeah.
you get a little bit of that arm flying back, and you may like want to get like a little bit more of a side-to-side bobble around.
Yeah, I think I'll make the run in general just slower, give her like kind of an ambling.
What's a cool thing? Like, I really love this idea. Like, I don't know why it took me so long for it to occur to me. Somebody said that a cartoony run is really just a bouncing ball.
Yep.
Like, and you look at that, like going onto it, and that gives you kind of this like long hang time, and then you don't really notice foot sliding.
Oh gosh. Like Ratchet and Clank.
Yeah.
He has a very bouncy run, so.
I love the Ratchet and Clank games so much. With the Shira?
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
It seems more comfortable. Right.
I'm just done with today.
I had two of these lectures back to back, but the first one was just explosions.
You're extra.
That is horrible.
Does this happen every year? Like, does everyone explode every year?
Yeah, this project's always like. I got into this because I didn't want to open Unreal. I think it's fun. Like, I don't know, like, there's something really gratifying about playing your own animation.
There was, look at this.
Oh yeah, I saw that. I like that.
And it like fits perfectly with Lily. So.
So, I would say open that earlier than later.
Yeah.
So
Oh,
we may
okay.
have to.
I don't know if I would want to put in like houses or anything yet. Just at least some ground.
Yeah, I mean, what you can do is you can get that, bring it in, and then you have all of those levels. But sometimes with a level, there's a game mode, and the game mode for this one is a third-person game. You would maybe have to adapt it to whatever the game mode is, or you can just use all the elements from that to sort of build your own little area.
Whatever. Yeah. I think it says pack. It's an advanced village pack. I don't know what a pack is. It could mean that they just have a bunch of loose assets that you just place yourself.
Yeah, usually they would have like an example scene. You can bring all those elements in.
Oh, it looks so cute.
Okay.
Okay, so I kind of wanted to come up with a concept that was going to play before I started jumping into stuff. So I've been coming up with all kinds of characters. I like cute and squishy, so I was kind of going that route. And then for some reason, I picked up a Red Riding Hood.
Fear in your
I
eye.
didn't like that idea, and at first I was doing bunny explain yourself. It looks really familiar. I don't know why. Probably accidentally stole from somewhere from the crevices of my subconsciousness. But
That's okay.
yeah. But I'm kind of going with like a boss is like a sweet version of the wolf. So I'm kind of coming up with like a kind of like a platformer type thing where he runs along and avoids enemies or whatever. And gets up to the boss.
Then what you got?
So, just for a second.
The alternate
You're gonna do,
is,
do you know what you're gonna do with something?
yeah,
Construct, yeah. You're gonna construct that, and you're gonna be.
the other.
Just auto access to it.
Yeah.
The game itself.
Yeah. My one thing is I don't know where to go with the attack. Because I don't really run into people. I didn't think about that until later. I like the idea of a ranged weapon, but I don't like that head cheap.
Shoot that food.
It is.
Like start smacking with the elements. Like a twist, like a maybe like spin and
Yeah,
smash
yeah.
rather.
Okay.
I have the sniffles. I don't know why. It's probably because I've been talking for so long.
And then making this needs to be that. Okay. You see that jump already? I don't know how to explain what I just did in words. Like, I big slimy hole.
Yeah, so this is kind of my character.
Oh, Little Red Riding Cap.
Yeah, so it's like Little Red Riding Hood theme. The world is probably going to be bluish instead of red. Will stand out really well.
Well, down there.
It's going to be like this movie world, like the Morrison future.
Yeah, and you're saving the world from,
Yeah, but then we have like, I like the idea of a TV kind of cat.
you know what we should do? It's like her basket can have her weapons in it.
That's kind of what I was thinking about. Like she has a
But she
basket,
throws
she throws
pies.
60 cookies at him.
Yeah, like
For muffins.
pies the wolf
But
in the
I have
face.
to have like that punch or that kick kind of thing.
Oh, no, you can have a throw. Like if you have a good throw animation, I think that's still in the body mechanics. Like you have, yeah.
I might pitch that to Grant.
Yeah.
He's kind of thinking like take the hood and go punch him. So I'm like, you don't want to punch a goofy wolf. Get stuck in
No,
the
that's totally cool. That makes no sense. No one's gonna do that.
Now I just get to draw all kinds of cool little cookies and stuff.
Yeah, that's how we do it. What's that question in your face?
Ballsy punch. Accurate. I'm gonna find an open space on one of these boards and then try to draw horror Garfield.
Here's my idea. Here's my idea. This is that. I just had it. I was fiddling with it. No.
Lisa, I have a dilemma.
What is your dilemma?
I'm trying to remember the name of a series on YouTube that is really obscure indie, and it's about this giant pink shape-shifting monster that goes around and hangs out with this weird guy who's lost all his family because he ages. And well, he doesn't age, so everybody's outlived him. And there's a giant robot that's about to destroy society because society made it. And it's such a cluster. I don't know what the correct name of it.
I have never heard of it. Apples. Like something really weird. Because like it's already such a hodgepodge.
See, the thing is, this pink shapeshifter.
Like what was the shapeshifter? What was the shapeshifter turn into?
He's turned into a suit for the guy who's built and talked to him before. He has turned into a bus. Because he's very weird.
Yeah, no, when you said bus, I literally thought like when I heard the boss sound, but no way he turned into a bus.
He did. You know, a bus. Like
It
a
sounded
sound
like-
beep bus. That's mildly.
I have no idea. That is so bizarre.
It is. It's so bizarre, and that's why I loved it so much.
If you find it, tell me you found it so I can see it.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's just really surreal.
Yeah, that's definitely the right word for it. hey, we can learn to work and play. Hey, and get along with each other. Hey, what a wonderful kind of day. Hey, what a wonderful kind of day. Hey, hey, W. Wait a minute, wait. And I say, hey, and I say, hey, what a wonderful kind of day. Hey, we can learn to work and play. And get along with each other. Hey, what a wonderful kind of day. Hey, what a wonderful kind of day. Hey. That was beautiful. Get to class. Bye.
You tell me the name of it, I'll look it up later.
It's called interface.
What?
Interface.
Oh.
You did that.
Yeah, I'm pulling it up. I told the people at ID Tech I would send them a portfolio in 2 weeks, and that was 2 weeks ago, so deadline's tomorrow.
Ooh.
I figured I'd clean this one up because I also did some After Effects and stuff in it.
Cool. Sounds good. I did not realize what time it is, so
It's fine.
I'm going home.
Yeah.
I'm gonna eat some pizza.
Yeah. Is it like store-bought?
Actually, I don't know. We're not for sure. It's my cousin's birthday. Wait. She went to. Apparently, I've just been. Sorry, Lisa. I've just been recording you for the last like 30 minutes.
no.
It's actually more recording like this corner here. I never stopped the video. So let me go ahead. No, you're not actually in it. It's like the front of your desk there. So,